title of today's lesson is going to be called The Peculiar People of the Old Testament. This is talking about how the Jews, they had this title. They were referred to as a peculiar people. In Deuteronomy chapter 26, we're going to read quite a bit in Deuteronomy, so if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Deuteronomy. We're going to start with Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 18. We'll go ahead and hop right in to talking about God's peculiar people, which were the Jews. And the Lord hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he hath promised thee, and that thou shouldest keep all his commandments, and to make thee high above all nations, which he hath made in praise, and in name, and in honor, and that thou mayest be an holy people unto the Lord thy God, as he hath spoken. So God gave them this very, very high honor. They were his people. They were his chosen people, a peculiar people. They were to be separate from the world. And one of the key parts of this, at the end of verse 18, it says that they should just keep all his commandments. And I've been going through my daily Bible, reading a couple chapters a day. And one of my favorite things that keeps coming up, and I didn't realize how often it says this, and it says, keep the commandments so that your life would be prolonged. So that's what it was like for the Jews. It was life or death. They had to get this right. To me, it just really sticks with you. And you're just like, imagine today, if you miss the commandments, and then you make your life right, it's all good. But for them, it was just like, get it right, or you're in trouble. And so there's very, very high stakes for these Jews. Yes, they were peculiar. Yes, they were God's people. But they also had very, very high stakes before them. Deuteronomy chapter 27, verse 9, also will give them another title here. Let's listen for it. Deuteronomy 27, verse 9. And Moses and the priests and the Levites spake unto all Israel, saying, Take heed and hearken, O Israel, this day that thou art become the people of the Lord thy God. So they have another very, very beautiful title. They were being called the people of the Lord thy God. So they were not just a peculiar people, they were one that got to have this wonderful title of the one and true God. The people of the Lord thy God. And today you might be asking yourself, are we a peculiar people too? And I think a lot of you guys might know that we are referred to as a peculiar people. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, it says, But ye are a chosen generation. This is a New Testament verse. This is us. We are a chosen generation. It says, But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. And before I continue to talk about the Jews, I want to talk a little bit about our role in this. Yes, they were the first and chosen people, but then if we go to Romans 1:16, and I know one of my favorite singers as a child is this guy who was actually a Christian rapper named Lecrae. And he would always say, he'd always put up there, he goes, Romans 1:16. And it was Romans 1:16. And he would always put that on all his shirts, 1:16. And I think it was kind of a way for people to ask you and say, well, what does 1:16 mean? And he would say, oh, Romans 1:16. And it was a calling to them. And it's one of the most beautiful verses in the entire Bible. It says, For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. So it is now to all people. It was first open to the Jews, and now it is to all people. And in the way that we are put into this, it talks about this in Matthew chapter 3, verses 9 through 11. It talks about this kind of grafting in process and how we are able to be part of this process. Matthew chapter 3, verse 9, and this is when John the Baptist was going about, and he was baptizing people, and the Pharisees, the different Jew groups, Jewish sect groups would come through, and they would tempt him, and they were trying to be seen of all men and be like, oh, look how holy I am. Matthew chapter 3, verse 9 says, And think not to say within yourselves, We have Abraham to our father. For I say unto you, that God is able of these stones to raise up children unto Abraham. So you see that these Jews that came up to him, and that they were trying to have their deeds being in the sight of other men, he was saying, don't think you're that special. And that's kind of one of the most, that's why I almost have an ironic title. As you'll find out, yes, they're peculiar people, but it's just like, but not that special. Yes, you're special, but don't lift yourself up too high. Don't do it. And God knows that pride can get to them. And they were going to these things. They're like, I'm of the seed of Abraham. Look at me. And he's just saying, don't think you're that special. Later on, John the Baptist tells them that. He says, God is able of these stones to raise up children unto Abraham. We are those stones. We are those things that God can raise up, and we can be a part of this plan, just like it was saying in Romans 1:16, and how it's first to the Jew and also to the Greek. We are a part of God's plan. All people are a part of this plan. And then verse 10 of that says, and now also the axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he that cometh after me is mightier than I, whose shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire. So for us here today that have been baptized, and we are baptized with the Holy Ghost, this New Testament baptism, we are able to be grafted in. That is how we can put on Christ. Deuteronomy 7:14 says, Thou shalt be blessed above all people. There shall not be male or female barren among you or among your cattle. So the Jews, they had all these titles, a peculiar people, the people of the Lord thy God, blessed above all people. They really had, and you can see how that can go to your head. You can really see why that can happen. I think for Christians, I think we've been humbled so many times. I think that kind of comes natural to us to say like, well, we're not that special. But for the Jews, imagine being told, you're a peculiar people. You are the chosen people. The rest of the world, you are the ones. And I think there was exceptions to this of people that could be outside of the Jews that could do the right things and be on the right path. Look at Rahab the harlot when she was vouching for the spies and protecting them and lying for them, and they said that was accounted to her for righteousness. So there's different people outside of the Jews who could do the right things. But they were the special people. They were the called people. They were the people that could have a direct relationship with God. And they could have they had what was that? The Ark of the Covenant, where they could have a direct relationship with Him and speak with God and have this intimate relationship with God. And so now it comes to the question, what made the Jews peculiar? What really made them? And before this lesson, I actually stumbled upon this on accident. This is what made me want to do this lesson. I was just like, why the Jews? What made them so special? Why would God choose them? And it's really a simple answer. I kept trying to go through all these complex answers, but it flat out tells us the answer. Why are Jews peculiar? Why were they chosen? Let's read it together. Deuteronomy 7, verses 8 and 9. These are the two key verses of the entire chapter, of the entire lesson. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 8 through 9. It says, But because the Lord loved you, and because He would keep the oath which He had sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen, from the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Now therefore the Lord thy God, He is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love Him and keep His commandments to 1,000 generations. So the key part of that, hopefully you caught it, was that He would keep the oath which He had sworn unto your fathers. It was simply He was keeping His promise. He's like, yeah, you guys get to be part of that promise, but was it because you did something beautiful and righteous? He's like, it was your fathers who did the right thing. And specifically, it's talking about God's promise to Abraham, which is when it's passed down to Isaac, and then passed down to Jacob and his 12 sons, right? And so that was it. It's a very, very simple answer. And I love how eloquent the Bible is. It's just so simple and eloquent, just simply, I will keep thy covenant, to thy fathers. It's just so beautiful. So, yes, the Jews are, they are a peculiar people. They are a people of God, but it was because of Abraham. He started this good thing. And one of my favorite things about this verse is it says, to 1,000 generations, He had this promise to them. If they would hold on to these commandments, and we will see that they didn't get to make it to 1,000 generations. And that's the thing about a covenant or a promise, is that in order to keep that covenant, that relationship, they had to keep the commandments. They couldn't stray away, because God at any time could be like, you know what? It's done. You guys have failed. It reminds me of Moses when he was on Mount Sinai. When he's up there and God is delivering him the 10 Commandments, and then he looks down and God's like, get down right now. Right now they're making a golden calf and they're worshiping false idols, and he's like, I am going to strike them down. And you know Moses tells him, he's like, remember the promise that you gave to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. He's like, remember that promise. Don't go out on your promise, because God's like, I fulfilled my part of the bargain. They're not fulfilling their part of the bargain. It's death time. And luckily Moses was on their side. He was their secret weapon. There's so many powerful men of God. Wow, what a relationship that he had with God to say, don't do it. Don't kill them. Hold on to your promise. Remember your promise. Remember how faithful they were and why you made this covenant in the first place. Okay. And so now I want to do a quick little drawing of the path that Abraham is going to go on, so then we can refer to it here. So over to the side, like I always draw, I have the Mediterranean Sea over here. It comes all the way around up like here. And then we also have our classic, like the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. So the Dead Sea down here. I know this is terrible scale here. Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee. And also the Jordan River that comes down through there. And then also, normally I'm talking about right here in the promised land, the land of Canaan. But right now, it actually starts way over here. This is the starting place of where this all began. You know, I've drawn this how many times on the board, and now we get to see a couple feet to the right. Way over here, we can see that there's this, and this is going to be a very rough drawing, so be patient with me here. There's this river, the river Euphrates, that passes on approximately like this. And there's also, there's the Tigris over here that comes around. I know this is not perfect, so give me a little bit of grace here. But down here, right below here, right here, is this place called Ur. And that is Ur of the Chaldees. This is where Abraham grew up. And so that is our starting place. This is where all the beauty of the Old Testament began. Was this man who was born of Ur of the Chaldees. And so then the path then continues on, and they cross over that roaring river, the river Euphrates, and they get over to this place called Haran. And then after going to Haran, he then is called, and this is the most beautiful part of this whole journey, is the trip from Haran, and then to when Abraham is called to go down, and this is his path. We'll try to put a dot here. And then he comes down, and he's called into the land of Canaan, like we always would think about, right? And so he comes down, and that's his calling, down to the land of Canaan. So that's his first path. His father Terah takes them from Ur the Chaldees, and they travel to Haran. And then Abraham, with his calling, God says, get you out of this country. It is time for you to go where I have a promise for you. And Abraham was going to have to leave everything behind. So I won't get too far ahead of myself, but he first starts at Ur, then goes to Haran, and then goes over into the area that we're more familiar with, the land of Canaan. So the first one is his father was Terah, and he was a worshiper of other gods. And so you think, man, the man who the Bible, where it all started about, you would think that his father would have been on the right track, but he wasn't. He wasn't. And I think that's part of the beauty of how this gets started. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, it tells us about this. I don't want to just make a blanket statement without proving it. Joshua 24 and 2, and it says, and Joshua said unto all the people, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nachor, and they served other gods. This time they lived on the other side of the flood. I personally believe that this is probably referring to the river Euphrates. This was the main body of water. He's saying they lived on the other side. They were over on this side of the flood. And then verse 3, and I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood and led him throughout all the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. So that was his journey. God told him, get you out of that country. It is a wicked country. They worship false gods. And I am a jealous God, and I want all of your love. And you are going to be my starting place. You are number one. You are going to start this. You were the first person, the first start in this process. I mean, it's like if God gave you the first seed on earth, and you planted that in there, and it went down in there, and then it spread all abroad, that's what it was going to be like. It was going to be like, that is the first seed. That is the start of this beautiful promise. So once again, as a reminder, it goes from Terah and then to Abraham. And he was first called Abram. So if you're reading that in the Bible, it says Abram at the start before his name was changed. And so now let's go ahead and read a little bit more about this, the background of Abraham, or Abram. Genesis 11 and 27. We're going to read quite a few verses here. Genesis 11 and 27. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran, and Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abraham and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren; she had no children. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran's his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. I read all those verses, and that was basically just to describe exactly what we just talked about here. So we had Ur of the Chaldees. This is where Terah, Abram, and his brothers, and they traveled up to Haran. And then this is, if there's one thing I want you to remember of this trip, this was the most beautiful part, is that he was called away from Haran on the other side of the Euphrates, and he was called to go into Canaan. That is the most beautiful part. When in my Bible, it says that right at the top, it has a header. It says, Abraham's call. And it's just like, that is the most beautiful call. And another thing, some background that makes this, and I'm just trying to build up why Abraham is so beautiful, and why he's so faithful, and why God viewed him this way. And one of the things that helps us understand this, like I said, this is Ur of the Chaldees, so he was a Chaldean originally where he was born. Let's read a little bit more about the Chaldeans, and some of you might already know this story. Daniel chapter 2 verses 1, in the story of Daniel, it talks about these Chaldeans. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded all the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. So I want you to imagine this. Imagine that you're the king. You're the king, you're Nebuchadnezzar right here, and you have this dream. And it's bothering you. You want to understand this dream, but the problem is you can't remember your dream. You know that when you wake up, you're like, I dreamed a dream and I don't know what I dreamed. But in this case, you're the king and you can ask anything of the people, right? And sure enough, he dreams a dream. He doesn't remember his dream, but he knows he had a dream, and he wants to know what the dream means. Imagine that. I typically remember my dreams. I wish I didn't. They're a little bit too bizarre to me. But Nebuchadnezzar, he asks them, and he says, magicians, sorcerers, and then look at this. He lumps in the Chaldeans. These people that Abraham was known of, those people, the Chaldeans, they were lumped in there. They were amongst the sorcerers and the magicians. These were the people that, I just want you to imagine it. Say if you're in some sci-fi movie, and they're like, oh, you're going to go off, to the creepy, like, witch people, or the Chaldeans, the magicians, the sorcerers, the people that would bewitch people and tell you your fortune. It's my understanding that was the Chaldeans. They were amongst these people. They were seen as to God, that was like the utmost wicked thing, was these Chaldeans. And that was, and if we continue on the story, for the sake of the story, we don't need to know that. But sure enough, he asks these Chaldeans, I guess this is actually helpful, because he asks the Chaldeans and the magicians and sorcerers, he says, all right, tell me my dream. They're like, well, you got to tell us first what the dream is, so we can help you out here, so we can make something up, And he goes, no. He's like, you better tell me, or I'm going to kill you. And sure enough, Daniel, since he was of God, he was able to tell him the meaning of this dream. And so what it shows you, even though Ur of the Chaldees, don't think of those Chaldeans as something special. They were wicked and not special. They couldn't tell them their dreams. They were fakes. They could not do that. They could not reveal the king's dream. And so that's what I want you to think about. This is where he was born. I mean, it's just like Nathan of Oregon near Portland. It's like, oh, wicked Portland over there. And it's just like, oh, that's what's wrong with that guy. That's where I'm from. I'm from that wicked area. Okay, and then verse 32 of Genesis chapter 11, it says, in the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So that's where Terah ended. That's where his father died. That was the end of that journey there. And then abruptly. So all we get coming into chapter 12, look at this. All we get is we just know that this man's born in Ur the Chaldees. His father took him to Haran. And now he's going to get this amazing promise. And you're like, wait a minute, what happened? What happened before then, during Abraham's earlier life? And it should make you wonder, what's going on here? Why does he get this promise that's going to be the ultimate promise that's going to affect all of humanity forever? And he's going to be the single most important person, other than Jesus, I would imagine, in this equation. And we don't get a lot between there. I mean, it's interesting because I was going on YouTube and I was just like, man, what do the Jews think of this? What would a rabbi think? So I looked up and this rabbi was talking about it, and you know they knew the Jews they give you answers between here. We don't have answers in our book. The Bible doesn't tell us a lot about that part, but they said according to oral traditions, this happened and this happened and this happened, and they tell you all these little side stories that we don't get to know. They're not part of our book, and so I want you to be very hesitant. If somebody says oral traditions, be very, very careful. I think the authors of the Bible, I think that it was what they would consider canonical. They say what is supposed to be included, and there was a determination, and I think that God's hand was guiding that process. And so if it was not included, be very, very hesitant. And Alden and I, we like to talk about, we said, well, secular history says this. Sometimes it lines up, that's interesting, and it's not to ignore it. It's simply to say, that's interesting, but I'm not going to have that supersede what the Bible says. So let's not give it the utmost importance. Don't give it no importance. I think it's interesting. Don't get me wrong, but I think God gave us a perfect book here. I really do. And so that's the biggest part, is that what happened between that point. And I think we get a lot of hints. I think we have a lot of inferences that we can make of why God would choose this man. I personally believe that Abraham, or Abram at that time, was likely a faithful person already. I think that he was something peculiar. He was amongst these Chaldeans, these sorcerers, these magicians, these people who could tell you your dreams, or they would attempt to. I guess in this case, Nebuchadnezzar tricked them. But he was born amongst these people, so he must have been something separate. He must have been something special. He must have been something distinct. That God would say, I want that man. That man seems peculiar to me. That man seems like something who I want to raise up my seed that would then lead all the way up to Jesus. And so, I think that we can infer that he was likely already a faithful person. He was somebody that was peculiar from the people. He's peculiar from the bunch. And how do we know this? Because later on, this personality continues to shine when God tells him, he says, I want you to go and I want you to sacrifice your son Isaac. You know, he finally gets a son, and then God's like, now you got to sacrifice. And he goes, okay. Faithful Abraham, do you know what it is? Most of us, if somebody told me to sacrifice my son, Lord willing, when I have kids someday, I don't know about that. I don't know if I could have sacrificed anybody. But imagine God saying, sacrifice your only son. And he's like, all right, carry your own wood. Come on up. Let's go take you out. And he brought his son up there. He's just about to kill him. And then an angel stops him last minute. And he's just like, wait a minute. Don't do it. I was testing you. God's like, don't do it. And sure enough, while that was happening, when the angel stopped him from killing his own son, then a ram got stuck in the thickets, and God had provided a sacrifice. And so we see the kind of man here, and I would bet that between that point and before, in his life in Ur, and then all the way in his travels to Haran, I bet that he was a peculiar person. I bet that he was a very special person, and we can see that based off later in his life, but we don't have that piece. We don't have that piece. And I think, I can't help but get really excited about what kind of person Abraham must have been. And I think that's why, as a child, I was so confused. I was just like, why Abraham? And I remember being so confused, like, I don't think there was that much to, why pick him? And I've always wondered, I never really quite understood that. But I think that God knew. I think that God could see his faithfulness. And we can also see that when God called him, when he says, I want you to leave everything and I'll make a covenant and a promise to thee, he left everything. He's kind of like the fisherman that they said, when he told him, he says, I want you to leave your life and go on your way and follow me. When Jesus was telling him that, it's kind of the same way. Abraham said, I'm going to leave everything that I knew, and I'm going to go out because God has a plan for me. He was faithful, and he believed in the one God, even though his father was somebody who believed in multiple gods. He says, I'm going to forsake those other gods, and I'm going to follow the true and one God. Another factor is God knows us before we're even born. So that's a helpful factor. God knows us. He knows who you are. He knows how long you will live. He knows how many breaths you will have. He knows the hairs on your head. He knows the hairs on your head when you're 99, if you make it that far. He knows all those things. How beautiful is that? And so, like I mentioned earlier, he likely rejected the way of the Chaldeans. And I think that's a very powerful factor to consider here, that he must have been something separate. And it's interesting because one of those Jewish traditions, they talk about this. And it's funny because when I was in middle school, my middle school teacher told me this oral tradition story about how, and this is not in the Bible. And he said, that, and he read us this whole story and he portrayed it like it's from the Bible. And I remember scratching my head and I was like, what? I was like, I don't remember that story because it wasn't. It was an oral tradition from the Jews, and they talked about Abraham, his father Terah, being an idolmonger. He sold idols. And then Abraham rejected those idols, and he destroyed the idols and recognized that they were false and that they could do nothing. And it's just like, I remember like scratching my head like, and he even told us, he's like, well, our Christians in the class today, he's like, they can probably tell you this story by heart. And I'm like, I don't know that story because it's not there. It's not there. And then let's continue on. Genesis 12 and 1. I'm going to read it one more time. That beautiful promise, the most important promise to start off the Bible here. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. He was faithful and he left. Verse 2. And I'll make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. I also want to, I think that's something I've always overread, was that between this point when he was called, it says he brought many souls with him. And so, I don't know what that exactly means. I guess he must have been very charismatic. He must have been very moving. And for some reason, people followed him. People were moved by him. And I want to think, I guess it doesn't matter what I think. I want to say that it was because they saw that he was special. He had a relationship with God, the true God, and people could see that. And I think he was something that people looked up to. I think he was a leader. And so now we're on to that part of the lesson where, yeah, you're peculiar, but you're not that special. and that's what we're going to get into here. Deuteronomy 9 and verse 5. And this is one of the key verses of this lesson. Not for thy righteousness, or for the uprightness of thine heart, dost thou go to possess their land. Imagine that verse. He's like, wasn't because you're that righteous. It wasn't because you have an upright heart. That's not why you're going here. He's like, and then later he goes on, he says, but for the wickedness of these nations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee, and that he may perform the word which the Lord sware unto thy fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there's two factors here. He says, because I kept my promise to this guy Abraham, that's why you get to continue on your path. And then also, he says here, because the other nations are wicked. He's like, well, yeah, you're better than them, you know. At least you chose the one God, you know. You falter all the time. You're a stiff-necked people, but they're worse. You know, it's kind of like the saying, the lesser of two evils. I think that's really the case here. It was just like, well, they're the better choice here. He's like, don't get too prideful. And that was one of the main flaws of the Jews here, is that they thought they were so special. And they were. Don't get me wrong. This is not to downplay them. They were peculiar people. They were God's people. But it's not because of their righteousness. It's not because they were such great people in that sense. Okay. And it's frustrating because these people, like, they were shown all these things, and the whole way along, they murmured and murmured and murmured. They said all these things. They're like, oh, great, you brought me out here, you delivered me away from the Egyptians, and now you brought me out to starve. And I just want to go over a couple of these amazing miracles. And the Jews still murmured all the way. They complained. They went against God. They would worship other gods the whole way along. The first part is that God, He delivered them. Here's the first miracle. He divided the Red Sea. There's miracle number one, and if you saw that, you would think that you would have it right the whole way and that you would never stray, but they did. The second one, He led them in the daytime with a pillar of clouds, and so that's how He would show them where to go. And so He actually had a supernatural, a beautiful miracle to show them exactly where to go. It's like, not only did I part the sea for you, but now I will give you a pillar of clouds to follow by day and a pillar of fire by night. And that's how you know where to go. You know, people today, they think, oh, I'm going to follow that North Star. They got a pillar of fire to follow. I mean, it's like, if you still are going to murmur against a thing that could create a pillar of fire for you to follow, it's pretty miraculous that they're able to mess that up. God also gave them water out of a rock twice. One of the times God said, I want you to strike the rock on the first time, and God did it. And Moses struck the rock, and water came out. And the second time He told him, I want you to speak to it. He struck it. He was angry, and He struck that rock, and water came out the second time. But this was one of the reasons why he didn't get to go into that promised land. He kept giving in, and he wasn't as faithful as God would desire. So Moses didn't get to go in. So twice he was given water out of a rock. God also provided them with manna, angels' food. You got to eat angels' food. You got to eat this miraculous food that rained from heaven. And imagine that. And then He also provided them with quail. So He provided them birds that blew in. And they also, and so like I said, they murmured all the way. And something I wanted to mention here also is kind of a way to think about the Jews. A way to kind of put them and see the hierarchy of how they fell into place. And this is specifically to address that verse that talks about how they were wicked and you were not. And that's to address that part of the verse here. So the way that this kind of lined up was that God had placed the Jews on top. They were the peculiar people. They were God's people. Excuse my handwriting here. And below that, there's actually different rankings of how they were to view these other wicked nations and how they were to treat these other nations. For example, below that, it put the Edomite and the Egyptian. These were not viewed as the most wicked nations, believe it or not. That's not how God viewed them. And the evidence of this is Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 7. It says, Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. So these were not viewed as the people that were to be just cleansed out and wiped out. And this is not very fascinating. Even though they were in slavery to these Egyptians, he says they weren't to abhor them. They weren't to hate them. It's not very fascinating. I find that very, very interesting. It's like, because thou wast a stranger in their land. God's almost just like, well, you were captive then, fair and square. It's just like, that's almost the way He treats them. It's just, and you really can feel that. You're not that special, right? You're not that special. You don't even get to hate those people that had you in captivity. Okay, and then now we go on to the next line of how they viewed other nations. The next one is the Ammonite and the Moabite. The Ammonite and the Moabite. So these are two nations that were viewed a little bit worse in this hierarchy here. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 through 4, it says, Ammonites or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Because they met you not with bread and with water in the way, when ye came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Beor of Pethor, of Mesopotamia, to curse thee. So it's just like, that was less of a, I'm going to wipe you out like immediately, and more of a, they don't get to enter for 10 generations. It was a little bit different, and so it was like, yeah, they're starting to be into that hated category, one that needs to be cleansed, but not quite. And so there's kind of this hierarchy, and you can see how God was viewing these different people here. And it says specifically, when they were going out of Egypt, He says, they didn't give you food and water. They didn't support you. And it kind of reminds me of, I know Oregon, we didn't get Texas history. I know everybody in Texas, they get their Texas history. I got to learn about the Oregon Trail. In fourth grade, they gave us this game. And they said, there's all this point systems of could you get the right supplies and you're a pioneer, could you make it off to Oregon? And she had this whole elaborate system of trying to get there and making the right decisions. And part of that was some Native Americans were supportive and some were not. Some of them would provide them food and water and take care of them. And it's pretty miraculous. And it's kind of unfortunate later the way that we're like, well, you gave us food and water and took care of us, but now we're going to kick you off. Now you don't belong. And so it's kind of a bummer here. So I think they would have been viewed a little bit higher if they were given that food and water, if they did try to take care of them on their way. I think God would have seen them a lot differently. And then let's go ahead and put, there's a lot, in this, and I believe this hierarchy changed over time based off different decisions that they made. And then the last one, I always misspell this, Amalekites. So these were the people that, imagine this, you're going out of Egypt, you've just been delivered out of the bondage of the Egyptians, and now you're going on your way, and it says that these Amalekites, they would smite the feeble ones in the back, the old people, the sick people, the children. These were the ones that God is just like, clean them out, wipe them out, get rid of their seed. They do not belong here whatsoever. And so now we kind of have a hierarchy. Yes, they are viewed highly, but part of the reason was because these guys were so wicked too. And it's interesting that God puts that into his reasoning. Yes, I held the promise, and because these were wicked, this one followed one God, these ones followed multiple gods, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what they followed, but it was multiple gods. They, like for example, Dagon or Baal. There's various gods that it tells us about in the Bible of what they would do. Okay, and then on Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 6, understand therefore that the Lord thy God giveth thee not this good land to possess it for thy righteousness, for thou art a stiff-necked people. He's like, don't get too prideful. You're a stiff-necked people. You're a stubborn people, and you can't hardly get it right if I put it right in front of you. But I just laid out all these amazing things that God did for them and presented them. And he still is calling them a stiff-necked people. And then the last part, this is the last part of the lesson here, is what this all led to. In the very end, ultimately, it led to the destruction of Jerusalem. And this is their ultimate downfall. So we've kind of, I gave a little bit of the start, Abraham, and where it all started, and now I'm going to get all the way to the end, the stiff-necked people. And it was supposed to last, and the reason I want to mention this was supposed to go to 1,000 generations. That was how long he would uphold his promise, up to 1,000 generations. They didn't make it that far, not even close. And here's what came into play. Deuteronomy 28, verse 49, it talks about their end. This is the last verse I'm going to mention here. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue shall not understand. Is the Romans. The Romans are going to come in there, and there was going to be not left one stone left upon another. Imagine that phrase. One stone will not be left upon another. I mean, I just always imagine as a child, imagine two stones like this, two little pebbles, and something that was just so violent, so deadly, that it was just like that wasn't even going to happen. And of course, that's figurative, right? But that's the amount of destruction that they were going to go through because they didn't follow God fully. And that was from day one. Follow his commandments, follow his commandments, follow his commandments. Don't worship other gods, follow his commandments, follow his commandments, follow. And it says it over and over and over and over and over. This is the main thing. Love me. I'm a jealous God. Love me. Love me, love me, love me. And what came into play here, I didn't draw this. I haven't drawn this on the board for you. But clear over into Rome. Imagine present-day Rome, and they came clear around. I wish I could draw this better for you guys. Let me see if I can draw something for it up here. So where the Mediterranean Sea, you know how I'd always draw it right here, how it comes along and comes up and goes around here, and comes all around. So that's our typical picture: the Mediterranean Sea, the Dead Sea, the Dead Sea and Sea of Galilee. But the Romans, they came way. I mean, imagine this was like over here. This is where the Romans started, from a far-off land. And they came over, they came across, they came around, all the way down to Jerusalem to wipe them out. And then they continued on their journey all the way around. And you can just see the destructive power of these Romans from faraway lands. And they just came, it says, swift as the eagle flies. And to me, that just, that gives me chills. And I heard a lesson by Raymond Steiner talking about how it says that the people in Israel, the people in Jerusalem, it says that the mothers, they were going to be in such a compromised position. These tender-footed women, it says they would eat their own children. It was just the most wicked thing. They were put into the most horrible situation possible, and that's eventually what this led to. Something that was supposed to go to 1,000 generations, compared to people eating. And it's just like, and I hate to say it that way, but it is disgusting. It is horrible. And those Romans, we imagine Jesus on the cross. There's a lot more crosses in this situation. They also got crucified out there, and that was their demise. And Jesus was warning them of that. He was warning them, and he's like, I want you to depart out of this place. He's like, woe unto them that have sucked. Woe unto those people that have children, because you got to get out of here. Because these Romans, they're going to come swift as the eagle flies. They're going to come through, and they're going to wipe you out. This is ultimately the end of the Jews, this peculiar people. I know my friend in high school, he kept trying to argue with me that the Jews are still God's select people. They are not. We are all God's people. Romans 1:16 lets us know that it is to all people, to the Jew and also to the Greek. The Jew also to the Gentile. The Jew also to what we'd be called the heathen. We are the non-Jews in that sense. And that should give you amazing comfort. That we are not lumped into this same path of destruction like they are. I haven't seen the prophecy like that. Yes, the God will come again. Yes, there will be this rapture where God will come again and He'll take us up and we can meet Him in the clouds. And that's all I have in the lesson. I hope that it was helpful to you. Hopefully you have a bit of a background and understand where it all started and who Abraham is. I never wanted any lessons that wanted the plan of salvation, which is to hear, believe, repent of our sins, confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and then to be baptized. Like I said, you can put on Christ through that baptism, and we can be placed into this equation where we are amongst the Jews. We can be that peculiar people along with them. I guess it's to all people. The Jews, they need to convert to be Christians, but God has called all people. With that said, I want to go ahead and also offer an invitation to anybody who would like to be baptized.